Sonya Bilocerkowycz, a resident here in Perry and a professor at SUNY Geneseo at the college. I'm here today with Ted Wetherbee, local Wyoming County artist, and we're celebrating the release of his book of paintings, As I See It, that goes through his whole career and has depictions of all of his work. So, Ted, would you just start maybe by telling us a little bit about yourself? If you're meeting someone brand new, what would you want someone to know about you?
Well, that's a very good question because I don't know the answer. I can only say that I was born and raised in Buffalo area, and that soon after high school I decided I wanted to pursue the art and went to New York City, and I lived there for about 10 years studying. I was also drafted during the Korean War and returned to New York. By that time I was married, and I returned to the Buffalo area in 1960 with a growing family. And I had to work for the railroad for 30 years, but during that time I tried to pursue a little of my drawing and painting, and when I retired I pursued it as a vocation, and I've been painting ever since.
Wonderful. And we can see from your recently released book, As I See It, which is a sort of overview of your entire career and collection, that you're quite prolific. This book is huge. There are tons of paintings here, absolutely beautiful work. And since we're celebrating this book, I thought maybe you could share with us a little bit about the genesis of this particular sort of retrospective book.
Well, I was told by Jackie Hoyt, the director of ACWC, they wanted to publish the book, and I provided most of the paintings. Bob Doyle did the photography, and that's how it came into being.
Wonderful. Okay. So as I was looking through the book and sort of thinking about your career, I started to notice kind of three main subject matters that it seemed like you were taking on. So you had portraits and figures, you had these amazing dynamic crowd scenes, and then landscape work or sort of natural world work. And I was curious, as I was sort of categorizing your work in these three ways, I was wondering, how do you categorize your own work? Do you think about it in similar categories? Do you think about your work in a more of sort of different eras of your life or different movements? How do you think about your own work?
I just look at life around me and the world as it is today. I see almost a picture at all times. I'm looking at a picture right now as I look at you two. So really it's a very simple process. I don't think I dwell on things too much. I've always read a lot, and a lot of things come to mind as you paint or think of a painting. And painting is really, it's literature in a sense. It's a voice of silence. Think about it for a while. There's a lot more going on than just looking at the picture. Even in the gesture of the hands in a picture, they can mean a lot. And the line itself can mean a great deal. And so paintings are a lot more subtle than you think. This is a world of quick fixes. And all we're used to is sound bites. The art of painting is, to a certain extent, disappeared. But there was a time when people would come to a church and look at the figures of the saints, and it would mean a lot more to them than it would today. Today, I think, in general, painting is, and perhaps even reading and music, are a lost art. People are quite happy with, as I said, a very quick fix.
Mm-hmm. Sure, because we're sort of inundated with images all the time. It's
All
hard
the time.
to devote much time to one.
Right.
Which is why it is such a treat to sort of meet, to spend time in a gallery, such as the one we're in right now, or to meet your work in the book, because it sort of demands, pause and attention. It's more gratifying, to see it here on the page even than to see it online.
I would like to think so.
Yeah, I think this piece is beautiful. So you mentioned that literature inspires a lot of your work, and I noticed that your 2020 Best of Show Award piece, Our Revels Are Now Ended, has an excerpt from Shakespeare's The Tempest that accompanies it in the book. I wonder if you might speak a little bit about either this specific inspiration or a little more about how literature influences your process.
Well, literature is very influential. As I said, I read a lot. And sometimes in my images, I begin to see something of a writer or an author. And that was a case of where I'm trying to imply that the world as I see it is at the present time in chaos. You'll notice the figures in that particular painting, the arts are being shoved aside by a group of business that to me is the downside of humanity. I see the greatness of humanity in the arts. I don't see it in capital. I see it in labor. There's a big difference to my mind. Labor has value. For me, capital has none. And so, there you have it. I grew up during the FDR administration, and I remember people rationed. People were considerate of one another. People had victory gardens. It was an entirely different world for that brief period. Prior to that, with Hoover, you had what we have today.
Interesting. So I guess this leads to my next question, which is, could you just say a little bit more about your process in general? Like, where does the inspiration come from? What does the process look like maybe for a given painting?
Well, as I said before, it's just something I'll see. I was here at the gallery, perhaps 5 years ago or so, and there were two couples sitting over on the bench across the road, and that inspired a painting. I think it's in there, but I'm not sure.
It is. I saw it last night, and my husband said, "Oh, I recognize that bench."
Yeah. Well, the painting was inspired by those two couples, and I tried to recreate them as I remember them, and usually my visual memory is pretty good. So the one fellow that's in the painting came in and said to see it deliberately. So
did you go over and talk to them and
No.
tell them? Oh, okay.
No, I just watched them from across the street, and a lot of times I carry a sketchbook in my car, so a lot of times I'll just sit there in my car and sketch whatever I see, and that becomes the basis of a painting. But all of the images just come from in here. I don't have any trouble doing that.
Wonderful. How can you articulate how you know when a painting is done? How do you know when you're done with it?
I don't know if you do, to be honest. I work on them, and after a while I can't see anything more, and so I'll let it go. But if you I've hauled paintings out after years and reworked at them.
Oh, cool.
In fact, this one is one of them.
Really?
Yes, it's totally reworked from 20 years ago.
Can you say a little bit more about what exactly you changed or what you focused on when you revisited?
I guess just trying to make it better. The same way an author would try to improve his wording.
Sure. I have a lot of trouble reading anything of mine that's been published because once it's published, I can't change the words. So it's actually very frustrating, and I sort of don't want to engage with it after that.
Well, that happens when you sell paintings or they go on to other hands, you know.
Sure.
Then you can't change it anymore. It's not yours.
Right. But if you keep it in the house, you can do something about it.
I've got a barn full of paintings.
Great. That's
I try to work in the studio every morning.
wow. Amazing. 7 days a week?
Yes. Well, I'm retired.
That's wonderful. That's so great. What a luxury that is at this point.
I'm sorry.
What a luxury that is. That's really nice.
Oh, yeah.
So I was a soccer player growing up, and I noticed that you had a beautiful scene of a World Cup match in here. I wonder if you might tell me a little bit about the inspiration for that painting in particular.
Well, it isn't a very nice thought, but when I watched the game that I tried to depict there, I saw ugly America, because the women were beating up on some poor team. They scored the game 14-0, and they allowed their star to score, I think it was 8 goals, which is unheard of in soccer. And I thought, perhaps, I didn't watch the game carefully, but perhaps the coach sort of substituted a good deal, and there was no need to humiliate this small country.
Interesting.
I took an opposite view of the general sports scene, which thought that it was a wonderful American victory and all of that, but I didn't see it that way. And that's why, if you look at the painting, you'll see what I saw.
Yeah, there's certainly an edge to it a little bit. It doesn't, I didn't know how to read it because it didn't quite seem happy. That's really a fascinating critique. So you're basically arguing through the painting that just because we could beat them by 14 points doesn't mean we necessarily should have done that.
I don't think it was very good sportsmanship. I participated in sports when I was in high school, and that was not our attitude. And as I said, in soccer, 14-0 is obscene.
Oh yeah, no, totally. Well, I appreciate your perspective on that. It's one I haven't heard yet, but I really like it. I wanted to ask you about some painters that are influential to you. Who do you cite as your influences? Maybe from when you were back in school and maybe today, if those have changed at all.
Well, the people that I studied with in New York were all well-known artists, and they were very helpful. They knew I didn't have any money, so I always had a scholarship somewhere. And later, after the Korean War, I had a GI stipend, so that carried me. I think for our times, we need German expressionists who were depicting Germany during Hitler's rise to power. I'm very distressed over our present situation, although individually the world is very good to me. I live on a very quiet road and follow my own inclinations, but when I look from the world view, it's very terrifying. I feel like we're destroying this beautiful planet.
Do you see your art as being political in any way?
I suppose it comes out in some ways. I think what you are comes out in your work.
I think I felt that as I was looking through these, especially with some of the crowd scenes, thinking about all these different kinds of people that you had depicted moving in really interesting ways. There's almost, you use the word chaos, but I sort of in some of the paintings saw almost like, I don't know, like a symbiosis, like everyone was sort of like, it was like one organism, but everyone, all these different parts. Something about that feels really hopeful to me in what are otherwise difficult times.
I try to feel very hopeful too in people, good people that I meet. But as I said, I'm very appalled at the lack of action throughout the world in meeting the very great problem of population and planet destruction. And frankly, it's such an enormous problem, I don't think anybody can get their hands around it. But somehow we're going to have to come to grips with it if there's a future. I mean, for me, there is no future. I'm 87, going on 88. So, of course, I'm very aware of my own end. But if you look at the last painting in the book, which is also a quote, I think it's the last painting, yeah.
Oh, I love this one. Not with the bang.
I think you're familiar with the quote.
Yes, The Wasteland.
Yeah, T.S. Eliot.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Can you tell
And
us?
again, the quote came after the painting.
Okay.
I did the painting, actually, it was from a model, a woman who modeled, but the painting took on a darker edge, if you will.
I can see that. This figure kind of seems like almost a steward of like this last little bit of green, sort of green life. It's really evocative and it's definitely a challenging painting. I see Easter Island sort of
Correct.
images in the background.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And this you completed last year. Is that
Right.
you completed last year?
That's, yeah, the dating is rather nebulous.
Rough, yeah. So that actually leads well to my final question, which is, what are you currently working on? Or maybe another way into that question is, what are you really excited about right now in your work? What's getting you excited?
Actually, you mentioned political before, and actually I am working on a big political painting. It's a triptych, it's about 5 feet tall and about 16 feet wide. And the left panel is a panel of not so ugly people. The right panel is of kind of a postage of various types with a Martin Luther King type in the background. And the central panel is frivolous Americans, whining and dining and dancing and playing, which is what I see a lot of the world.
So it's partially about the urgency of this moment and the fact that
Correct.
you have this sort of tragic knowledge as the artist. You see the urgency of this moment, and not everyone does.
Yeah.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot. I really can't wait to see that painting. How close is it to being finished?
Well, it's pretty well along right now, because I have to mention that I work simultaneously on other pictures, and I've done a couple of all the goldenrod in the fields, so that sort of captured my attention for a while also. And I'm drawing all the time. I go to a couple sessions with friends where we draw a model, so I'm drawing a lot. I should say I'm working all the time.
That's great.
Which pleases me, because for 34 years I worked for the railroad and hardly had time or energy to do much of anything. I'm lucky, I've had a long retirement. I retired back in 1995. So I've had a lot of time to work and do things that I think are important. And I'm glad to have the book out, so that because it pleases me very much to have people see my work. I try to think of it as valuable, although I realize in the general scheme of things it may not be. I'm sure you're aware of those feelings, but
Yeah, on my worst days, I think about that a little too much, but I think we're all very lucky that you have also had a long retirement and that you've been able to devote this time. This is really a gift to the community. It's so wonderful to see this work.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, Ted, with this opportunity and this awesome platform that we have here?
Not really, but I hope you edited a lot of what I did say.
I think you sounded very smart and like a very interesting person.
Well, I'm glad of that because I felt like I'm putting my foot in my mouth all the time. I'm kind of a long thinker, if you will. I think of what I should have said about 2 days later, or more.
I understand that feeling. Thank you for being here today, Ted. This is really wonderful.
Thank you for the interview.
Absolutely.